Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk Personalization. My name is Kevin P. Nichols, and I'm the Personalization Wrangler, your host for this show. I welcome and I am grateful for all my viewers, as well as my guest. Today, I'm speaking with Patrick Bosek about personalization and technical documentation content. Before we begin, let me tell our audience a few things about the webinar and our format. We can't see or hear you, so get comfortable and please enjoy the show. This does not mean you cannot ask a question. You may ask a question at any time by clicking on the Ask a Question tab in your webinar viewing panel. We will address the questions at the end of the show, so stay tuned. You can address or access additional content, handouts from my guest, and links to connect on social media in the Attachments tab. So be sure to check that out. We also have a poll, and we would love to hear your we'd love your participation. The poll for today is as follows. Are any of you personalizing technical documentation content? Choice A, of course we are. B, not yet, but we would like to. C, not that I know of. Or D, no. At the end of the show, we will ask that you provide feedback and a ranking. We use this information to improve the quality and programming of our shows, so please weigh in. I also want you to know that today's show is being recorded. 30 minutes after the show, you can come back to the URL you are using now to watch the recording. You can also share the link with friends and colleagues, and we hope you will. And now, 3 more quick slides. As a subscriber to the Content Wrangler webinar series, you qualify to receive a free complimentary help site assessment from the folks at Heretto. Check out the Attachments tab because you're going to see the link to that in there. Heretto will evaluate your help site against the best knowledge-centered judging criteria used in the Software Information Industry Association's SIA annual CODI Awards. You'll receive a free comprehensive evaluation of your help site, highlighting strengths and including practical suggestions for future improvement. You can download an entire 2024 State of the Customer Service Self-Service Report or get the summary in the Attachments tab of that report. The summary is called From Unsung to Unstoppable: How Technical Writers Are Driving the Self-Service Revolution. And I can tell you that that report is exceptional. The long form format is absolutely phenomenal. I would recommend it, but the summary gives you highlights of the overview of that report. And finally, Heretto is our official sponsor with Avenue CX, and we are very grateful that they are. So let's get started. And I'm sorry, I just dropped my... So thank you for joining us for Let's Talk Personalization. Patrick Bosek. He's a CEO and co-founder of Heretto. Patrick is a believer and thought leader in content operations and structured content, as well as content operations. He seeks to advance the content and information development industry with new technology, thinking, and approaches to improve customer content experiences with the organizations Heretto works with and for. At Heretto, he and his team work on a wide range of projects, all focused on improving authoring, production, and distribution of content. You will find him co-hosting the Coffee and Content program, which is part of the Content Wrangler series. And he's also a host of a podcast about structured content called Content Components, available wherever you listen to podcasts. So Patrick, did I get everything right about your bio? And I do want to add really quickly, he's one of the most friendly and accessible, but absolutely brilliant CEOs that I know. And I really mean that. So I'm so excited to have you here.
That is one of the nicest compliments I've ever gotten. I really appreciate that, Kevin. Yeah, you got my bio right. The only thing I would add is like the Components podcast. If you want to hear a bunch of nerds goof around and joke about content, that is the place to go for that. So we have a lot of fun there, and I think that's a great place to hear some of the more structured and nerdy pieces about it.
Awesome. So thank you so much. I'm so excited to have you on the show today. We're here to discuss technical documentation and personalization. But before we get there, I'm going to start a little broad. And the reason that I want to start a little broad is because I think that we need to set the context for a few things. One, AI right now is just buzzing all over the industry, and it's having a substantial impact on the intersection between content, structured content, technical documentation, basically everything. So I want to start there. And I also want some context around structured content, CCMS, these types of things that get thrown out but not always well defined. So I'm going to start with this. A recent Harvard Business Review article posits, and I'm going to quote this, "We believe that personalization will be the most exciting and most profitable outcome in the emerging AI boom, but only for companies that make a strategic focus." This is written by by David Edelman and Mark Abraham. It's in the newest edition of the HBR, and I highly recommend it. So I want to start there. Do you agree with that sentiment, Patrick, that it's going to be AI? One of the biggest promises of AI is personalization, but for only companies that are strategic about that.
Yeah, I think broadly speaking, I agree with that assessment. Is it the biggest? I don't know. That's probably a little bit of hype to go along with their article. But it's certainly one of the bigger things that you're going to be able to do with AI is to be able to take in content, data, other pieces of information that you know about your customer, your target audience, and then to deliver them an experience which is going to either be more interesting to them or it's going to be more efficient for them. And so I think when you kind of add those technologies together, the thrust of the article in HBR recently, I broadly agree that they're in the right direction there.
Yeah, and it is an excellent article, folks. Definitely check it out. It's one of the best I've read on personalization all year, and I do mean that. Let's start with structured content. How can it improve artificial information experiences, LLMs, these sorts of things, or vice versa? How can AI improve structured content?
So we could have a whole podcast we could have a whole webinar on just this particular topic in and of itself. So I'll try to be brief and touch some of the things that I think are maybe not talked about enough on this topic. And then, we can go as deep as you want on it. So I actually think that the most boring part of structured content might be the most significant first step for organizations that want to put together really effective AI systems. And that is literally just the ability to take content and reuse it in different places. And that allows you to say, okay, this set of content is going into this AI agent or this digital coach, whatever it is that the systems that you're using. It shares a lot of information and content with this other AI agent, this other AI application, but we have very fine-grained input control. So because you have your content componentized and you're able to select at a fairly granular level what's being put into one of these systems, it gives you the ability to really decide what they're basing their interaction on in a much more granular and specific way than you can if you're using unstructured content, where you kind of have to dump a lot of stuff in a much less granular, much less controlled way. And then typically there's going to be some combination of other technologies. So you can look at like vector databases, all those kinds of things. And then actually working on the prompting, so prompt engineering, to try to get it to work with that content in the right way. So when you have structured content, you get a whole different lever you can pull to change the actual experience with these AI agents. And I actually think of this, so I love the term AI coach because I think it's got a very visual representation to it. And I like to think of this example in relation to like a football team. So on a football team, you have a head coach. They've got very broad knowledge. You've got a defensive coordinator. They've got more specific knowledge, more specific purpose. You get all the way down to things like quarterback coaches, which are really just there designed to do one specific thing. So if you're looking at how do you deploy digital equivalents to these types of structures where you have broader systems, more specific systems, and the trust level on subject matter is going to change based on where you are in there, you need to be able to deploy content, some more broad content that's needed for context to the quarterback coach, but also to the head coach. And there's a lot of stuff that should just go to the quarterback coach. So having this input control with structured content, with the reuse mechanisms, with the ability to reassemble, kind of a digital Lego methodology, is really what gives you the ability to control the output of these agents.
I love that. And also when we think about AI, so there's obviously generative AI, there's also predictive, AI. We can talk about the definitions of those, but in terms of data, which is really important for personalization, what you just described, The data element of that, I think, is also critical with the structured content, wouldn't you say? Because if you have structured content and componentized content, you can associate data and then data collection with it at the component level. Am I correct there?
100%. So then you're kind of going up a level now into like, I would call this like level 2. So now what you're looking at is the ability to apply metadata in a very intelligent and fine-grained way around and inside of the content. And this is, so first step, just get your content into reasonable sizes that are, ideally data typed, but they're containerized and componentized, so you can use them that way. The second step is being able to associate metadata with them that you can then correlate to personification or personalization. And when you're looking out and you're trying to like build digital trust with your customers and start to create more data points, then you typically start using technologies like graphs or ontologies or taxonomies to start correlating that back into the content, where you can either pull specific pieces of content, so you can use some more traditional systems, feed those into AI responses, or you can actually change the content. So that's filtering in the structured content world. And if you're getting really like in the weeds about it, it's data vals for the people who are on here who are data people. So you actually have the ability to change and control the specific pieces of content that are going in based on the user you want a response given to. And that's definitely level 2 stuff in my view.
Yeah. And you know what? I normally take the audience questions at the end, but this is coming up, and I do want to clarify this. I think it's important. When you say personalization, do you really mean using personalization for classes of users, or do you mean personalization? Pardon me 1 second. I'm sorry. When you say personalization, do you really mean using personification for classes of users, or do you mean true personalization where we apply real-time monitoring of user actions based on captured patterns and then utilize AI ML to retrieve exactly the content or agent that the user needs at that moment to assist them when they get stuck or go off pattern? I'm going to let you answer this, but I want to give a point of view on that too.
Yeah, so that's a very astute question. I didn't see who asked that, but kudos, great question. And the spectrum between personification and personalization, I think there is a bit of a gray area in between those two things. Having both of them is really important. We actually did a coffee and content on personification, I want to say earlier this year. It was very good. I would encourage anybody here to go look that up and take a look at it, because it's got a good background. When I'm talking about personalization in the context of, kind of level 1, level 2 stuff, I'm probably talking more about personification than personalization, where it's less about actually taking like current stream of work and adjusting the content which is being delivered in real time. And it's more about understanding generally who the user is and how they fit into, where they are, what they're interacting with, what their background is, like these kinds of things that put them into general buckets and make for more efficient experiences. And that's correctly pointed out, more typically referred to as personification, which is extremely powerful.
And I'm kind of going to disagree with this on this just a little bit, and here's why.
Yeah, go for it.
I say that personification that personalization is a spectrum. And I make the argument that any content that is contextually targeted to a user based on whom, what, where, why, when, or how is personalization, even if it's at a segment level, even if it is, hello, Kevin, please open this email and read it, blah, 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 blah. Like it's personalized, but it's very rudimentary personalization. And then we can go all the way down the spectrum to what we would call one-to-one or hyper-personalization, which is kind of the buzzword they're using now for one-to-one or individualization, personalization. I see them all as aspects of personalization. And yes, I understand what can't even say it now. Personification is, but I think that fits within that broader thing. Now, I do agree that real-time personalization is what you want to really get to. And that really is, and I had this a great discussion with Val Swisher about this a while ago, and she's like, well, I don't consider like the segmentation and this sort of thing to be real personalization. And I can hear that point. I agree on a level, but just on semantics, I have to put my content head on and say, I think it's all personalization. It's a spectrum that goes from very, very, very broad to then very specific. But that's just my POV. Personification is very important. And thank you for that point. I'm going to go to the next part of this question one, which is, can you just define quickly for us when you're talking about structured content? Then we have we have structured content that has what you mentioned, componentized content. It's often semantic or what some might say smart or meaningful content, and it enables it for reuse, correct? And it multi-channel proliferation, but also output based on rules, this sorts of things, correct?
Yeah, for sure. So I want to just loop back and actually kind of do a yes and on your last point before I answer that question.
Sorry.
No problem. I take your point, and I think you're 100% right. I think in some ways we get a little bit too hung up on the labels here. Fundamentally, what we're all trying to do is we're trying to deliver information to an end user in the way that is most acceptable or most efficient to them. Now, in the form of marketing, that's an offer, but an offer is still information. And, we're trying to deliver that to them in a way that is going to be most easily recognized, most easily understood, most acceptable, most interesting, right? In the case of documentation self-service, that information is whatever is going to get the thing into their head quickly enough to help them solve their problem, right?
Right. And the reason that I do that, because I work with a lot of B2Bs. When you're talking about account-based marketing, more the B2B model, personalization oftentimes starts at the segmentation level. Totally. And I think that's why I sort of clarify that one-to-one personalization it's not that you can't do that in B2Bs, but it's very effective in retail and B2C and these types of experiences. So thank you for that, Patrick. I want to go a little bit into the definitions, and we're going to go into technical documentation in one moment, but do you need a component content management system? I sometimes talk so fast, I have to slow myself down. A component content management system, a CCMS, to enable structured content solutions. And can we just talk about that for 1 second?
Well, I think it depends a little bit on how you're using the word need. Strictly speaking, do you need a component content management system to implement structured content? The answer is no, you don't. There are organizations that use other repository and workflow models and authoring models to manage, maintain, and deliver structured content. There are viable solutions for that. All of this always comes down to what's going to be most efficient for your organization. What component content management systems offer, broadly speaking, is a pre-baked set of tools and processes that work for most people in creating, managing, and deploying structured content. That's not everybody. There's no doubt about that. Structured content isn't, having a set of tools isn't required for structured content. You don't have to have a hammer to build a house, but for most people, it helps.
Yeah, and I think one thing I want to point out too is that these tools have come a long way. Just in recent years. I know a lot back in the day, let's go 10 years ago, 12 years ago, they required more technical expertise. They didn't have this sort of WYSIWYG editor experience. They weren't as authoring friendly as say a copy deck would be, or some of the content management systems that are web AEM or Sitecore, some of the bigger content management web-based systems, but they have come a very long way. And in terms of just the experience, how to take, many of them operate off of, data XML, for example, but making it much more user-friendly to the authoring experience, as well as just their capabilities in terms of multi-proliferation and output logic, correct?
Yeah, so certainly the component content management industry has come a very long way in the last, however many years. I like to believe that we've been part of that progress. I think the thing that's key when thinking about your documentation tools is that any selection of your content operations ecosystem is going to have some form of trade-off. And what we really try to advise our customers and the people who are considering being customers to do is to weigh the trade-offs and make the decisions on what's going to have the greatest business impact for their organization. And I'll give you an example of this. So Data XML is, it's the most structured, most semantic, widely used XML and structured content form. Maybe setting aside S1000D, which is very purpose built for like aviation and some other forms of like trains and stuff, right? But like we'll set that aside because it's not generally seen as general purpose. So Data XML is kind of on one end of the spectrum in terms of semantics and structure. On the other end of the spectrum in terms of semantics and structure, you have Markdown, which is far less structured. Now, if you're writing a README file for a project that you're working on, you shouldn't use Data, because the trade-off in terms of putting together that structure, how it's going to fit into those systems, how it works inside of systems that are better for text-based management, don't make sense. But when you're in a situation where you want to apply metadata at like the list or the step or other semantic levels like definition lists, those types of things, to be able to personalize that to a specific audience, then you're in a situation where those semantics start to have business value, and the trade-off that you're making is educating people on how to put that together in a consistent way, and that trade-off starts to become worth it. So there is no right or wrong when it comes to like the structures you use or the inputs you use in your content operations. It's all a matter of weighing what has the most business value and how that goes against the costs and the overheads of accessing that value.
And I would argue it depends on the context. I think both can be very useful in the same, like if we're talking about a large companies, which is what you and I oftentimes work with. And yeah, I think it's very important. We do have one question I do want to get to, because we mentioned hyper-personalization, or do you recommend tools to get you started with hyper-personalization and really for that one-to-one individualization experience? One thing I would say is read up on customer data platforms. Obviously, CCMS as a backend can be very incredible too. There are marketing automations like Adobe AEM, for example, which sits across multiple channels, but you need a very large team to stand those up effectively with Adobe expertise. But yeah, I would say that would be start with customer data platforms. I interviewed Tony Byrne from Real Story Group on kind of best practices for standing those up as well. Those require a lot of effort too. To get to that one-to-one individualization that we're really talking about, or people are really striving towards, it's a lot of effort, and it requires complex tooling, and it also requires complex teams. It's not just readily available from a push of a button. And moving on to that, Salesforce recent State of the Marketing 2024 report, it averages, and by the way, Salesforce bought out Evergage years ago, which is a CDP, and they have that within their offerings. But they consider mature personalization to be personalizing in 6 or more channels. Now, I disagree with that a little bit. I would say that yes, multi-channel or omni-channel proliferation, but on top of that, one-to-one personalization or hyper-personalization and personification, like these things are maturity. But let's go with what that definition is a little bit. How does structured content really help enable that when it's sitting in, in content operations?
Yeah, so structured content, when done effectively, is going to allow you to run content through as many channels as you want. The beauty of structured content is that when you're creating content, you're creating meaning and semantics rather than creating layout. That's the core principle of structured content.
I love it.
So the thought process is, and this plays out practically in implementation, is that when you're deploying content into a channel, you pull the content out, you run it through a set of compile steps, and then you're able to modify it in a styling sense, a layout sense for that particular channel. And this can be done in, broadly speaking, 2 different ways. So you can have it done as a static output. And in Data, that's typically done through something called the Data Open Toolkit. where it takes the data content, it runs it through a process, then it will produce, an HTML output, a PDF output, or really it can produce whatever you want. So you could produce JSON with it if you wanted to. People produce things like Eclipse help in the past. I don't think anybody does that anymore because I don't think anybody knows what Eclipse is. But like really the endpoint doesn't matter. It's the engine that will get you what you want, but it is a static set of files that comes out. The second option is dynamic, and dynamic is going to come through an API connection. So for this, generally speaking, you're going to need a vendor because the vendor is what's going to produce the engine for you that you can then go and access the API and get the content in real time or near real time, and have it in the form that you're going to then use downstream in another application. Both static and dynamic have their places in terms of connecting to channels and enabling the ability to produce these experiences. But I want to loop back to the first thing I said, because I think that this shouldn't be lost in this sense. So having those two technical pathways to deploying this content is really critical. But the thing that makes it structured content fundamentally different from everything else is the ability to tie content together into packages and have content exist in multiple packages. So when you look at being able to deploy content across multiple channels, you may not want all of your content in all channels. And what structured content gives you is the ability to say this set of content, which may be 80% the same as this set of content, but 20% different, goes into this channel, and this one goes into this channel. And that is really the fundamental thing that structured content gives you, is it gives you the linking and packaging and management structures to produce multi-channel output with the flexibility of having real fine-grained input control. That is what drives the ability to scale that up and do it in a way that enterprises are going to be able to maintain over the long haul.
Yeah, and I'm a firm believer that CCMSs are the backbone to any good content operations for technical documentation in particular. I mean, other things as well, but it's very important. We did a survey, Scott Abel, actually, Content Wrangler, helped with as well, on customer self-service help content and technical documentation teams in the B2B space. And what surprised me about this is the their number one right now piece of information that they produce and value is printed user guides. Now, print could be PDF format, but it's also what they put into the thing.
Wow.
Yes, print is not dead, folks. And when you go into where they see it in the future, it's still ranked, I think, at 25%, within the top 4. And this is against the backdrop of chatbots and AI, like all this other stuff. And so technical documentation, that is, when you have this CCMS in place or structured content in place, you can output to like that user guide. You can then take that information within the user guide that you want to then parse and put into like the chat. Like it allows you to sort of do that and when I say channel, I'm thinking print format, web, mobile, chatbot, social. Like it's all of these different form factors or end user touch points that are form factors that the user engages with. So I think, for what you're talking about, it's incredibly important to that output to have a system in place. Go ahead.
Can I jump in on that? Because this is actually something that I think is not focused on enough in the industry, which is a definition of a channel. Everything you just listed is a channel, no doubt. And everybody gets that those are channels. But I think one of the biggest things that people tend to forget is that web isn't a channel, like websites aren't a channel. You may have 5 different web endpoints that are different experiences.
Right.
Those are all their own channels. And then
Right.
if you go back to like digital coaches and you think about the tree that I was, kind of reflecting the structure of an NFL team onto, every single coach is a channel.
Mm-hmm.
So AI bots is not one channel. AI bots for most organizations is going to be 1,000 channels.
Right.
And if you're trying to maintain those individually, you're never going to keep up. So what structured content gives you is the ability to maintain those at scale and with incremental effort, as opposed to duplicative effort, when you want to stand an additional bot or channel up.
Absolutely. And I do want to add to that, Patrick, because in-store is a channel, brick and mortar is a channel. The customer service reps that you call under technical support are getting content that feeds them, that is an output of your structured content solution. Those are a channel, and you have to think of it that way, especially I think also structured content, we're talking omnichannel. And the best way I describe omnichannel is that really at its highest level, it's serving up the customer experience as seamlessly as you can, regardless of which touch point they are in, engaging with your brand. In order to do that effectively, again, what you're talking about in terms of structured content and CCMS is it can be very effective for enabling omnichannel experiences.
Totally. And fundamentally omnichannel at its like level one implementation is just having every single time a user gets a piece of information, it's the same. Like, as long as it should be, right? So like if I'm getting a piece of instruction or I'm getting a definition or whatever it may be, I don't want to get a different one from a support rep and from my app and from my chatbot and from the website. And that's an actual experience that I had. I was on customer service with a brand we would all know, and I had looked something up on the website. It didn't work. They had an app that I happened to have on my phone. I looked it up because they had a help system on the app. It was a different piece of information, so I called, and then the support rep gave me a third piece of information, which was distinctly different from the other two that were also different. Now, I think that maybe they've resolved this. It's been about a year, 2 years, maybe almost 2 years since I had this experience. But this is where a lot of organizations are, that all of those things are maintained independently. And, set aside all of the waste that's going on there, because like that's 3 times the effort. Well, it's a destructive experience for customers.
Awful. And in the B2B world, we're working a lot with technical documentation teams and standing up things like we create enterprise content strategies, but oftentimes one of the big levers is, well, we need case deflection. And I'm like, well, case deflection requires a very unified content strategy approach and data approach, because you have to be able to figure out where that customer is. Are they in the community portal? Are they at the knowledge base? Are they at the website? And then you have to connect where their drop-off point is, right? And again, this is where structured content is very important, because it can help push out consistent, as you're saying, content experience in those experiences, so they don't go to the community portal, see a release note that is the wrong version versus one that's on the website, and start with all this disconnectedness and confusion. I want to go to self-service content and personalization, because it's a subset of technical documentation, but a very, very important one. And folks, just so that you know, Havas Media Meaningful Brand Index always talks about what makes brands meaningful, and trustworthiness is ranking up there really high, as most people would probably guess. But part of what makes brands trustworthy is having really good support content in places and self-service in places, because it makes them reliable and it gives the customer what they're needing. So let's talk about self-service content and how personalization can benefit that from your perspective.
Yeah, sure. Again, really large topic. I think this kind of is the same set of themes. And it comes back to the idea that in self-service, you want to give people the ability to access everything they could need. You don't want to be too predictive. But at the same time, you only want to give them what is really useful. And that's a fine line to walk. And I think that this is distinct in the personalization efforts that you see on more of the go-to-market side of the house. And I think that that's really important to call out and to be aware of when you're going and you're building strategies around this. So, take Amazon, for example, which is probably considered to be one of the leaders in personalization, to the extent where if we get recommendations when we're in the Amazon app or on the website that aren't relevant to what we're looking at now, we're frustrated, right? Like, I'm shopping for Christmas for my son, and like, if I'm not seeing good recommendations for Lego sets that are relevant to the ones that I'm looking at, I'm like, Amazon, what are you doing, man? Like, these need to be better. So like, we've gotten past like, do you have my data? We're like, you need to have my data so that I can get a good recommendation and I can get done with buying Lego sets faster. But on the side of technical documentation, it's totally different, right? It's much harder to it's much higher risk to have a very definite predictive engine behind it, because somebody's not going through a shopping experience. They're not shopping for documentation. What they're doing is they have a specific problem and they're trying to find their way to a specific solution as quickly as they can, and generally speaking, without having to talk to a human. So I actually don't like the term support deflection, because a lot of organizations have taken that to mean we're going to give up on self-service and we're just going to let people come to support. And then right before they submit a ticket, we're going to try to put a piece of content in front of them to deflect them, right? Like
Yes.
They're coming in, we're trying to deflect. And that is what, has been pushed by a lot of the ticketing systems and those kinds of things. What you want is true self-service that entirely avoids going down the support channel at all. So support avoidance is the way that we should be looking at it. And that means building really thoughtful experiences with your content that find people at their first touch point, which is Google or in your app, and provides them the ability to either get the answer quickly or follow a very well laid out digital trail of breadcrumbs to the answer before having to ever think about going to support.
We're on our analysis, and we've been again working with these big global brands. We've built out information architecture, structured content solutions, this sort of thing. Believe it or not, folks, when people go to look up a particular product or something like that, they go to Google. Even if they're customers of the website or their clients or your B2B, they will look up a product number. For example, if you're like B2B or a part number on Google, and use that as the entry point rather than going to the website. It tends to be the highest. And if you talk to these bigger companies, they'll tell you that the data shows them that. And I think that you offered a good point there, that which also brings in SEO, like support content and self-service content, even if it's personalized, needs really good SEO in order to support that. I know we're kind of going into different directions, but I want to bring this back. I want to bring this back to one of the points you said, basically about case deflection. And case deflection for me is always kind of a gnarly thing as well, because there's also this sentiment that the customer call centers are completely, we need to get rid of them entirely, which is not at all the case. They just need to be used effectively, and they need the right content, and they need the right training. And there's times at which, and we know this is very, very true, we've seen after shelter in place a huge return to brick and mortar. And one of the drivers there is that people need human interaction. And people love self-service, but only when it works effectively. But there is a contingency of people out there that will need that support from that customer service representative as well. And so I think you're right. The whole case deflection thing does get to me a little bit too, for a variety of different reasons, but I love what you said there. Let's move to personalizing. What types of pitfalls should one avoid when they're trying to create personalization, leveraging structured content solutions?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing is hiding too much. So when you get to a very advanced level of this, and this user owns these products with these settings and these kinds of things, and you can actually go in and filter the content all the way down to showing them specifically what relates to them, you're actually potentially missing an important use case for technical documentation, which is showing them the solutions using the product through the documentation that their current implementation doesn't support. And so it's very common, especially in software, that someone is using the software very successfully. They've had years of it where they're with an organization, and they have a new problem they're trying to solve that's in the realm of what this software solves, and they'll be in the documentation trying to figure that out. A really good personalized experience is going to show them that this other module they don't have solves that problem. And in that way, the personalization here is going to be highlighting something as opposed to hiding something. So knowing when to take content and remove it from the experience to make it more efficient, and knowing when to put content into the experience so that people realize there's more which is possible. I think that's one of the really tricky things to get right when you're dealing with self-service and structured content, and finding that balance in a way that's going to serve your customer best.
Yeah, love it. I was going to ask like best practices for structured content solutions. I'm still going to ask that. And personalization. Can we just go over that really quickly? Because we have a lot of questions and I want to get through some of these questions to
let's go. Yeah, sure.
But go through what are some best practices in setting up structured content solutions that will enable effective personalization?
So I think the number one absolute best practice is to start with good information architecture. Information architecture is so broadly misunderstood and so poorly resourced in many circumstances, and people just want to get on to building the content and the systems. And the reality is that, like anything else, you either plan or plan to fail, right? So the planning aspect of content implementations and doing the information architecture work, correlating that to the strategy, making sure that the way you're setting the content up, the structure up, the processes up, independent of the systems, is going to support your business objectives. To me, that's the biggest thing. Like if you get that right, everything else is going to be much, much easier.
And can we clarify too, because I think a lot of people hear IA or information architecture and they're thinking user interface information architecture does a sitemap, or who does user interaction design, which that is one type of information architecting. We're going back to sort of the traditional Rosenfeld kind of IA definition of designing a skyscraper that's meaningful for the end user. But there's also the level that you're talking about. So for example, when you're doing structured content, you need IAs to come in to figure out what's the structure to componentize. At what level do you go to componentization? What are the rules that are going to be necessary in place? So if we're talking data, for example, where are we going to create our own topics that are not part of the standard topics? What do we need to do in order to have governance to control the way that this content is structured and organized and thought through? This is how you're thinking of IA, correct? Or do you want to give a...
Yeah, I mean, there's more in it too, right?
Yeah.
So the best practice is to have somebody who really truly understands IA in a structured content setting involved in the beginning of your project somehow. There are fantastic consultants that do this for a living. Even if you have someone on your team who's an information architect, I've never met an information architect who's allowed to focus their entire job on information architecture. They almost always have a whole list of other things that aren't information architecture. So it can be really helpful to bring these temporary resources in, which is what effectively consultants are, to help that individual get a second set of eyes on things. So I think that to me is one of the most consistent leading indicators of success, is investing properly up front to make sure you have your information architecture set up.
I love it. And I concur. I would argue you need your personalization strategy and these types of things, like kind of at a higher level. But I concur 100%. If you want to stand up structured content effectively, or any type of componentized content, any type of content model that's going to involve components, you need somebody who really gets the IA of structured content. Okay, we're going to go to questions. Let's start at the top here. We have quite a few. Can you please share the resource report that said that users still want printed? Yes, printable docs. We put the link in. You know what? Everybody, it's a white paper Avenue CX and Content Wrangler produced. I put that white paper in the attachments tab, so you can just automatically download it. And I would highly recommend also, and I think it augments it well, you read the Hereto State of the Union 2024 Customer Service Report. They have a short version, like I said at the beginning, and that's in the tab. I actually would recommend the long version because I think there's so much great content in there, but the short version is going to give you the highlights. How do you recommend applying personalization principles to internal employees' focused knowledge bases, e.g. via ServiceNow?
So I think, this question is about how do you personalize using like a ServiceNow knowledge base. So I'm not an expert in ServiceNow, what's available in their knowledge base technology. I think maybe you are, Kevin. You are? Okay. Well, if you are, then you should answer this question.
That's a whole that's a whole show in and of itself. I would say this. Go through the analysis of your your internal employee profiles and your user types. It's going to depend on how you can stand up those authenticated users and what you're using to sort of personalize that content against. That's a very kind of difficult question for me to answer on the right here. But reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to have a conversation with you about that because I do know quite a bit about that.
I'll add one thing.
Now, go ahead.
Oh yeah, there's a little bit of a delay in our internet connection sometimes. That might be on my side. The one thing I'll add to that is that most knowledge bases are built functionally and fundamentally on a wiki paradigm, which is that they're highly collaborative open spaces where anybody can create and contribute a piece of content into them. Those types of spaces are harder to manage personalization and just by the nature of like how they're set up from a people perspective and like how they come together. I don't know that means you can't do any, but I think that, they're not really designed to scale up personalization technology or personalization strategies. When you're looking at the knowledge-based style approach to things, they're really meant to more serve as a common point for a group of individuals to share knowledge amongst themselves. And sometimes they kind of get pulled out into doing more publishing activities that they aren't really purpose built for. But personalization by and large, in my view, is something that is much more aligned with publishing strategy and much less aligned with like internal like peer-to-peer communication strategy. So I'm not saying you can't do any of it, but I just think that in terms of like general alignment, those are in very, very broad strokes. Those are kind of how those look.
There are knowledge platforms and knowledge-based platforms that are, yes, you're correct. A lot of them are wiki kind of paradigm-based, but there are ones that aren't. Happy to have this conversation, but it's too much to get into at this point.
Sure.
And I don't mean to cut off that user. Reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to have just a quick call with you or whatever and explain more in detail. You mentioned Google being the first line of query, but many are now going to general chat GPT first. Oh, good question. What are the implications of that?
I personally think we're still seeing the implications of that.
Yeah.
How trustworthy that's going to become and how much people are going to rely on that, to me it's a little bit TBD. Like I use it and I know some other people who use it. It has gotten a lot better. Like there's no way around that. Like it is something which is certainly advancing in terms of its abilities and capabilities. I don't think that really changes the fundamental strategy for how you provided information. Like at the end of the day, what is being provided to Google in a public search sense and what is being provided to ChatGPT, which AI-backed or not, is still search effectively, even though it's search that is can sometimes be summarized and then provided as more of a generated answer. The strategy that you're going to be using to push out to these systems, which don't have the ability to give you back a lot of information, so they're largely faceless in that way. That is not going to change fundamentally in the near term. Now, maybe ChatGPT is going to start having more bi-directional information, or maybe it already does, and I'm 2 weeks out of date, and they launched this last week, where they can provide you back information in real time, so that you can personalize responses that they can then pass through. I'm 99% sure they're not doing that yet. Maybe that's the future thing, though.
Yeah, and I would agree with we're not there yet where we can talk about the implications. But I have told people, I know we're in a very turbulent time, and I actually just had an interesting conversation on LinkedIn with Stephen Keith, Customer Journeys. Look, we're going to land on a tarmac at some point through all this turbulence that I really believe is going to not necessarily throw out all of the traditional concepts of marketing and these types of things. Customer journey modeling is still going to be necessary, for example. We still have the basics of marketing 101 that apply to principles, user experience, etc. But we have a lot more tools, a lot quicker processes to get us real-time information, and a lot more proliferation of data as well that allows us to act upon. But I think through all this turbulence, we're going to net somewhere where all of that's going to change certain things. but there's still fundamentals that are going to underlie. And I getting back to your point, Patrick, I think, we don't understand the implications yet. In a practical sense, how do you envision how AI models will consume and, more importantly, manage the metadata to enable personalization? Oh, good question.
Well, I think there's a couple of places that this works today. So a lot of AI models, in terms of their actual end user experience, are actually a combination of systems. I'm going to actually reference people back to another Coffee and Content. So we had, I'm going to forget the name of this, but maybe somebody listening would be able to remind me. So we had a speaker on earlier this year who did a really good job of talking about how RAG models work, retrieval augmented generation, how those feed into AI systems. So, fundamentally, if you're looking at like retrieval augmented generation, where you have an AI system that is gathering some content or some information and then running it through an AI process to produce a response, which is how a lot of the agents work in today's day and age. The more traditional system, which could be a vector database or it could be some other retrieval search type system, that has very well-worn patterns of how you leverage metadata to reduce the overall return set that goes into the AI agent. So in that way, you're using metadata as filtering and faceting for the content in what would be considered more of a traditional computing way, and that works very well today. That's something that you can get up and running, and there's people who've done good proofs of concepts for those types of things. In terms of like directly feeding metadata into AI systems and expecting those systems to like infer information from them, I don't know. Like, I've tested some of this stuff and I've seen some of it like kind of indicate that it's working. I've seen other things just generally not work. I'm not sure how far along we are with that today. I wouldn't say that like the stuff that I've done has produced the result that I'd be willing to say, oh, it's going to work this way, or this is the direction of travel. So I'm probably going to punt on that portion of the question.
Yeah. We still have 6 questions, and I'm gonna say, sure, let's stop taking questions after this, just because we're not gonna be able to get through. So we're gonna have to go quickly. But I'm gonna start at the bottom and work my way up. Best practice, IA reference. Do we mean content modeling? Well, I'm gonna quickly answer this. Feel free to chime in. What we're talking about is a specific type of information architect who deals with structured content solutions. Yes, they would have the ability to probably do content modeling, but I would recommend that if you're going to do this type of work, they would work in concert with a content strategist as well as a taxonomist. You want a multidisciplinary team. You also want an engineer and other folks on it as well. But that it's not content modeling per se. It's more thinking through the architecture and the structure of the content in order to enable structured content solutions, so that you have the right level of components, so that you have you start at the very large level. Let's say we're talking about today XML, like topics, that those are defined correctly, the rules are defined correctly, that you have the right level of components, and that it's all thought through sort of the same way you would the IA of like site navigation, but down to a modular level if you're talking about what goes into a product detail page, like a wireframe. Patrick, feel free to weigh in on that.
I would just say that content modeling is a subset of the IA work that we're encouraging people to do.
Yes. But I do think that you also, depending on the nature of that IA, if they're more like XML data engineering folk, like you want a content strategist involved as well, and you would want other folks to make that content model robust. Will personalization still depend on users knowing how to describe their needs? How does the system anticipate that on users knowing how to describe their needs?
Personalization still depend on users knowing how to describe their needs.
They don't always depend on users describing their needs.
I would say, broadly speaking, it generally doesn't. The objective with personalization is that the system is aware of the attributes of the user or of the user's intentions, and it's inferred those things into the personalization technologies.
Exactly.
Most of the time.
Yeah, and I would concur that it is about the system learning about the user. And the more the system learns about that user, or a system could be like tech stack, let's just say like systems or whatever, learns about the user, the more you're able to anticipate their needs and then deliver content that's going to be able to be served up that's relevant to those needs. Okay. Can you give an example of a CCMS? How is it different from a CRM? Is it simply an XML doc?
Sure. Yeah. So a CCMS is a content management system. So you put documents and content and things that you write, also media to some extent, into the system, and it's used to put that content together and push it out to other places. And the question just went away, but they want to know the difference between that and a CRM, right?
A customer relationship manager, yeah.
Yeah, so a customer relationship manager like Salesforce, that is specifically designed to record information about people. So those can be customized to the end of the earth, but fundamentally, the core object inside of a CRM is going to be a person. The core object inside of a content management system or a component content management system is going to be some unit of content.
Yeah, and a CRM is intended, its objective is to help the sales folks and sales enablement track leads and track the sales life cycle by managing the contacts and then where they are within that life cycle, et cetera, et cetera. CCMSs, and I think they are a CMS, but component is the key term there. They're kind of like CMSs on steroids, if you will. They go an extra level where they're a subset of a CMS, right? We have our web-based, we have our enterprise, et cetera. But they go even deeper than that and allow you to do much more kind of sophisticated. Have you ever heard of the concept create once, publish everywhere, for example, COPE? CCMS can easily enable that because it allows you to have components that you then surface up and dynamically build out content experiences. Would you agree with that, Patrick?
Yeah, I think that there's a number of different content management systems out there, and they all kind of have different approaches to the value they provide. Component content management systems are specifically designed to leverage the value of structured content, and then to enable you to build content operations ecosystems that get as much value out of that content as humanly possible. And they're very relevant in a personalization sense because of all the things that we've talked about for the last 56 minutes.
Yes. You're creating content personalization. You know what? We are 3 minutes before we have to go, and I'm gonna have to cut it off there. And I do apologize. We have had more questions this time than we've ever had. Feel free to reach out to Patrick and myself. Patrick, for example, me as well. We're happy to answer these questions. It's a great conversation, Patrick, and I'm thrilled that you joined us today. We could actually have you back and do another one because I think there's so much to unpack here. Did you have anything else you wanted to say, Patrick, before we end cap this and wrap this up?
No, I thought this was a ton of fun. I always love talking to you, Kevin, and I appreciate everybody coming and asking a lot of great questions. If you want to throw any of these questions on LinkedIn and mention me, I'm happy to provide you my perspective. Or personally, you can also connect with me on LinkedIn, and you want to follow up in a one-on-one channel. I'm also happy to have those conversations. So
love it.
Thanks, everybody. It's been great. I've had a lot of fun today. Thanks for having me, Kevin.
Yes, and to Patrick's point, let's continue this on LinkedIn if you want to. Feel free to tag, and if any of you just tag me singly, I'm going to bring you back into the conversations, Patrick. Would love to go down these paths because they're amazing questions. So as we complete today, as before, you can come back and listen to this recording that's being recorded 30 seconds after the show, and we hope that you do, and you can share out the recording. As I mentioned before, too, we would love your feedback. So please rate us 1 to 5 stars and then provide any textual feedback that you can. This helps with the programming and our thinking for the future. Next week, I'm going to be doing a special show, folks, and that show is going to be on the next week. I'm going to be doing a show, and it's going to be on the State of the Union of Personalization 2024 to 2025. It's going to be a special show because I want to focus on the trends based on what we've learned in the last half of this year, which are quite extraordinary, and there's a lot of trends out there. This is being co-sponsored, and really the primary sponsor is Heretto. Patrick is the CEO of Heretto, and love this conversation. Heretto is a CCMS. For those of you that were asking about what a CCMS is, it can help accelerate exceptional content experiences, and the AI-enabled CCMS platform can help deploy docs and dev portals that delight your customers. Definitely check that out. They have great videos on their website to explain more in detail what it is and what its capabilities are, if you want to understand more about that. We're also Avenue CX, that's my company, sponsor this. And I just want to thank everybody for being here today, and Patrick, you in particular as well. This has been a great show. I'll see you next week, and until then, be safe, be well, and keep doing great work. Thank you, everyone.
Everyone.